Perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. It is January 6th, 2022. This is the meeting of the EETAC, Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. And I want to welcome everybody, say Happy New Year. Hopefully you all had a good holiday season. I will start with, let's see, well, Zoom meeting protocol. I think we've all been doing this long enough to know we want to try to keep cameras on, try to avoid the chat. Don't use the chat because it's public record that we can't capture. And if you have a question, just you can do this. I can actually see the whole group on one screen right now. So you can do this, or you can just use the raise hand feature. I'm happy to call on people that way, and that shows me everybody in order. So we'll start with an agenda review. For today's agenda, we're going to go over the growth monitoring on the comprehensive report review, and we're going to go over the sections 5, 6, and 7, which is employment building permits, BLI, and other metrics. So if anyone has anything to add or anything, any changes or issues with the agenda, I guess speak now. If not, then I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on the approval of the December 16th Zoom meeting summary. Anyone's had a chance to review that?
Move to approve.
Second.
Just to note that I did see the reviewed the video of the last meeting, and it explains why my ears were burning, because my name was mentioned a couple of times during that meeting. So thank you guys.
We're thinking of you, Phil. Okay, well, I have
Sue has her hand up before we vote.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, Sue. I will call on you. So sorry.
That's okay. It's about the agenda. I had one question for Heather primarily. Has anybody considered asking Ed if he would stay on? I personally am really concerned about losing the institutional memory. I don't know anybody who has tracked this data and all of this information better than Ed has all these years. And I know he wants to retire, but it kind of worries me a little bit. And I'm wondering if anybody has asked him if he would consider staying on. And I'm sorry, it's not related to approval of the minutes, but I had my hand up before that happened.
I can talk about that when we, after we get done with this part and talking about the recruitment part.
Okay, great.
Okay, perfect. And I apologize, Sue. I thought you were seconding the motion. So that's what I thought.
Who did second? I heard it. I heard multiple seconds. Can we pick a second?
I think Phil and Alexis can fight over it. Did you both?
Since I wasn't there, Alexis, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So motion by John, Alexis has seconded. I will call for the vote. So all of those in favor, go ahead and raise your real hand. I'll let Elena capture that. Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, unanimous. There we go. Next item is public comment. I do not see any attendees, but as a reminder, we do leave time at the beginning of all of these meetings for the public to address this committee. So I don't see anybody though. So I think we can go ahead and move on. Am I confirmed in that, Elena?
Confirmed.
Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and just move into the second item on the agenda. But before we do, I just want to say one quick thing. You know, for everybody who was there last week, or if you've watched the meeting from last week or last meeting, we kind of, and I'm going to address these comments to myself in particular, but we kind of started to veer off into the policy discussion. And while I think, you know, there's a natural connection between the data that we've captured here and how it's being reported out and how policy had impacted it. I'm going to do my best to steer us away from, kind of going down a rabbit hole and talking about policy. And so I appreciate those of you who brought that up. And so I think that I will do my best to do that. So I just kind of want to put everybody else on notice that I'm going to try to steer us away from anything policy related. Those are definitely important conversations, and Planning Commission and City Council will have that opportunity to bring up some of those things, but we'll focus on the task ahead of us. So with that, I will kick it over to Heather and let you guys continue to take us through. We are definitely trying to be efficient with our time in these next few meetings. So just want to kind of keep everybody on task. And now I'll shut up.
That sounds good. And how about, if it's all right with everyone, we just save the recruitment discussion for the end of the meeting. We'll make sure we have 5 minutes at the end of the meeting, and we'll talk about that in association with a schedule update, because they're somewhat related. Am I getting general nods? Okay with that? Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to tack on to what Tiffany said. We actually met with the chairs earlier this week to prep for this meeting. Given the timeline and the challenges that Tiffany mentioned about, monitoring versus policy, we're monitoring policies, those, and how it can be a slippery slope. So a couple of things that we talked about beyond what Tiffany said is we are currently keeping, as we talked about, I think it was in the first meeting, we developed a list of emerging issues or items to study outside of growth monitoring. And so I'm not sure if somebody could mute, but if everybody could mute, that would be great. Because I'm getting a little feedback or some sort of noise. So we're keeping that list, and we're right now, that's kind of the couch or refrigerator, whatever analogy you want to use. I'm going to try to not say parking lot, of those things that we aren't sure that they're a recommendation, but they're definitely something that we're aware of, and we don't have enough information, or it should be addressed as part of it should be looked at during the UGB analysis. So we have that list, but then one of the ideas with that was also to make it very clear with that list, as well as with the recommendations, what is a monitoring task? Like, what is something we need to do the next time in monitoring versus something that we need to do as part of the next UGB analysis. When we'll be doing a housing capacity analysis, we'll be in a kind of a market study, we'll be doing an employment opportunities analysis. Those are big analysis and studies. So just making it really clear where some of these issues that have arisen, what bucket they kind of fall into. So I thought that was a good idea. And then we also talked about it might make sense, because it is hard to not get into the policy discussion. And I'm not suggesting we get into the policy discussion, but if something comes up and you guys get to hear my broken record of, yeah, that's kind of a policy thing. So it won't be in the report. We are documenting those things. We're trying to document them and not put them in the report as a list, but just have a running list of this came up. And it was a policy question, so it's not part of growth monitoring at this point. And then, you have folks on this committee that are actually representing boards and commissions and councils where policy discussion is happening. And so just having that list might be something that they can bring forward, not as a list developed by the EETAC, but more, I heard this idea in another area that I'm working in. And then also you all, the next time we get to the UGB analysis and you want to participate, which I hope you will, in that separate work that is happening, that's an opportunity for you to bring up those ideas as well. So I just, I think we recognize that nobody wants to lose these ideas, but they need to go somewhere else and not in the report. And so we thought this might be a way to do that. And we can just do that for now and then come back once the growth monitoring report is off to Planning Commission, and just talk about where that will live and what to do with it. So it's another kind of couch, a secondary couch. And then I also wanted to just also in the vein of keeping us going and kind of not streamlining our discussion, streamlining Elena and I talking, and it's mostly been me, is that instead of when we get to the sections, instead of us calling out kind of key points that are happening in each section as a prompting, we're just going to go to the section and open it up for questions, comments, feedback, because you all have been reading the documents. That's super clear. We really appreciate it. You don't need to hear us verbalize something that's like in bold or is a key takeaway already. We've already done that through formatting in the report. So we're going to do that. If there's something that we are particularly concerned with or particularly want to get your feedback on, we will mention that, of course, but we're just trying to kind of make sure you have more opportunity for conversation than listening to us talk. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elena after I share my screen, unless there's any other questions. Nope. Okay, great.
I don't see any hands.
Great. Give me just one second. Okay, Elena. Oh,
All right. Oh, well, I'll call on you, Kevin. You don't have to unmute, Tiffany.
No, go ahead and do your introduction. I just had a couple of comments here.
Okay, I really wasn't going to do much of an introduction except first to say that the employment development metrics was the last thing we reviewed. Those charts were the last ones we reviewed before we started reviewing the whole report. So we have gone over these recently, and then we can just jump in. So, Kevin.
So it just occurred to me that for the general reader of this report, however many they may be, it might be useful in that first paragraph to sort of underscore that what we're measuring with the metrics is land development and not job creation directly. I just think it's sort of buried there in the language, but I think just adding a sentence there that says what we're measuring is land development in acres, not jobs.
Yes, and actually just today I caught under the employment development metrics for the efficiency measures, some of those bullet points here say how many commercial jobs have been added. And I think at the time that these were put together years ago, there was the thought that we may be able to do that or hoped we could do that. And that isn't data that we have. And so I actually changed those in the draft we're working out of today to say how much employment development has been developed versus how many jobs there are. So thank you. And that we can call that out more clearly in that first paragraph. That sounds good.
Selena, I don't have any other comments, but for myself, I made a note here. What about job creation in other areas that are not in the UGB expansion? I guess I was just trying to figure out why we would only be looking at the expansion areas and not within the UGB. Does that make sense? So like, because we talk about there's all kinds of permitting happening, Autzen Stadium and some of these other places, and those are within the UGB. So I just didn't know why we were only looking at jobs created in expansion areas. That was it.
So maybe, well, and that, I don't think that is what we're looking at, but
Okay.
it sounds like your brain went there because that's so
I looked at the
prominent in the key questions.
Yep, that's why.
So
Okay.
either, I don't know if Heather has thoughts, but either we can maybe add key questions that expand about job creation generally, so that people don't get kind of sucked that direction.
Yeah, I would just add that, like Elena was saying, we're going to revise this section to make it clear that we're not talking about jobs. So this is really, what has been the employment building permit activity, and also what has been the activity in the UGB expansion area, because that was a pretty big deal. And so it's not that we're not analyzing both. And when you look at the charts, especially for the large lot industrial, you'll see that there's the development, what large lots have been developed in the expansion area and what haven't. And the expansion area really was just large lot development for the most part. And so, and there hasn't been any because it doesn't have services. But yeah, we'll make that more clear, because really job creation was we already talked about job creation when we talked about job growth, and yeah.
Okay, I've got lots of hands. So John, Phil, Dennis, and then Kevin.
Thank you. So for me, one of the things that might be helpful to add to this section is if you go up one page to page 47, the little blobs that we did for housing development, for me, if we could have a blob map of where the development has occurred, I think would be very interesting to me, because if I see development going out towards the unincorporated areas that are in the UGB, that would be encouraging. But if we're not seeing any of that, that would be, just knowing where these employment permits are being pulled would be interesting to me. And I don't know if that's something that's available or something that we want to add, but that would be helpful. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what's possible, what is or isn't possible for that, but we can talk about it. Who was next, Tiffany?
Phil next.
If I might have missed this, if it's somewhere in the report or in the appendices, but I know in the appendix, and this gets back to maybe the conversation or the comment that Kevin made about jobs, but there is a relationship, and you do reference it in the, I'm looking at page 120 in the appendix, where you have the table for the employees per acre for specific employment sites. And in fact, at the end, there's a sentence at the end of the first full paragraph there. It says the 2006 data was used for the adopted EPAs because they were the employment densities prior to the 2009 recession. So obviously there is a relationship between, there's this kind of methodology, I suppose, that that does translate how many employees, or what is our job growth or job demand that we need, and how many acres do we need to provide that. And this acknowledgement here about prior to the 2009 recession, and that the employment densities were pre-recession, that recession, you may want to put on the sofa somewhere that there could also be implications for employment densities going forward as a result of post-COVID. And that was a big part of the conversation, I think, at the end of the last meeting about possible conversion of commercial buildings or commercial space into residential uses, or just perhaps not having as great a demand. I will note that at least at this point in the pandemic, we're not seeing dramatic drop-offs in enormous high vacancy rates of office development or even retail development. I think both are hanging in there surprisingly. And even though we'll see certainly more online shopping, and it may translate further into differences in how we buy things in retail and how we work, for sure. But at least at this point, it hasn't, you know, that's just all perspective, and that gets into the policy discussion too. But it does relate to the numbers and some of the text that you have here in the appendix. So just an observation. Thanks.
Thanks. We did add something to the couch about that, and I added some information from OED about what they are seeing in terms of work from home numbers and people not in offices and stuff. So I'll look deeper into sort of how that relates to the EPA, or what question we can add that might make sense there too. All right, Kevin. Sorry, I think we cut you off earlier, Kevin. Oh, and you're muted. Kevin, you're muted.
I think Tiffany was going to let Dennis go first because I've already asked a question. So I'll let him go first and then I'll ask my question.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Kevin. I guess what I wanted to do, and it brought up, came from your initial comments about how it's language and how it might be interpreted by the general reader. Up until a relatively few weeks ago, I would certainly qualify in that category. Understanding these issues have been a steep growth, a learning curve for me. And what I'm wondering now is around this isn't really the question. We're looking around issues of how land use decisions impact potential employment development. And maybe some language around that kind of sense might identify that interrelationship, but being clear, we're not talking here about specific numbers of jobs, but recognizing the reality of land that is available or not for potential development of employment sites does have that impact because they're potential sites of increased employment. So just some thoughts on that languaging question that you brought up initially.
That sounds good. And then I think we'll get sort of more into potential development with the VLI a little bit. But yes, thank you. Kevin.
Kevin, you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
When I read through this, it occurred to me that a key question might be, and maybe this is handled already sort of with the PSU and the projections and things, but what is the demand for employment development, land development? You know, we're all very aware of the housing demand and what it's done to the market, and it sort of, for most people, doesn't need to be explained. But is there a demand? I mean, just because we do all the right things, we have land available, let's say we provide it with the right infrastructure, we, you know, finance that and build sewer and water and streets, doesn't mean that development's going to happen there. There has to be a demand for it. And is that covered somehow in this discussion?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
So we adopted a demand based on the OED, Oregon Employment Department's forecast for new employment growth for Lane County for 10 years. And then we projected that out and said, Eugene's going to have the same growth rate demand. So the same growth rate for jobs for 20 years as Lane County is projected to have. So that's that 2012 to 2032. And then when you figure out what number of jobs that was, it's like 37,000 for 2012 to 2032. Then, and I'm kind of tying together a little bit of what Kevin asked and a little bit of what Phil asked earlier, because I feel like we've got a whole bunch of, we're touching on a whole bunch of things, and I just kind of want to remind folks how the math works. So this is as part of the UGB analysis, you take that forecast, we came up with 37,000 new jobs. So that's the demand. And then we broke them out by the 4 types: industrial, commercial, retail, and government. And then we took those EPAs and said, okay, if we need 10,000 new jobs for retail, divided by whatever the EPA is for retail, it's like 55, I think, then this is how many acres we need to find capacity for. So I think that was kind of part of what Dennis was talking about. And so if we needed, and I'm not remembering now what exactly we needed, we'll get to that point. But if we needed 100 acres for commercial retail or for retail, then we looked for that in our 2012 BLI, Buildable Lands Inventory. And then whatever we didn't have enough land for to meet, then we did the efficiency measures to try to fit more jobs, to try to create capacity for more jobs. And really what creating capacity for more jobs is creating more building square footage, right? And so that's the connection from EPAs to building permits, but why we're talking about them in separate parts of the report. And so I guess I'm not sure if that's what you mean about the demand, but that's the demand that we've adopted. And so what we're saying now is that we haven't seen the amount of acres that we thought the equivalent amount of acres that we thought we had demand for 20 years based on that forecast. We have not seen that many acres develop based on where we are in the monitoring period. So to get at your question, Kevin, is there a demand? Again, I'm not sure if you mean initially or if you mean now, but we certainly are not seeing the demand. We are not seeing the amount of land develop for employment building permits that we thought we would at this point in the process. Kind of like housing mix, does that mean that we were wrong in the acres that we assumed we needed for employment? Not necessarily, because we're only 8 years into the monitoring period. That was a 20-year forecast. And we've had things like recessions, we've had things like COVID, you know, all of these things that we didn't know were going to happen. And so it doesn't necessarily mean we were wrong. It just means other things happened. And now we can adjust if we think we have enough information to tell us that things are changing. But I think kind of what I'm hearing is that we don't really know if things are changing yet. We don't know if the demand is different yet. We haven't had enough years and we've had too many big things happen to know if the demand is different. So we do have a new Oregon Employment Department forecast. And so when we get to that part, after we talk about the updated buildable lands inventory, we can talk about what would happen if we use that new. So what is the demand based on that new forecast? Is that helpful? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just, it seems like there's a different mechanism here because it's not supply driven. It's not a supply driven constraint. It seems to me it's a demand driven constraint. When you look at how we projected a certain amount of activity and we're way below it, you know, significantly, which isn't to say we're wrong about anything. It's just that it's different. And that's what we do these metrics to see, wow, where are we, where do we meet our projections and where do we where are we different? So I'll be interested to see what the newer employment projections are later.
Great. So I put myself in the queue. I had a question on this section right here, specific to, and John, you probably can recall some of this activity as well, but I know of at least 3 rezonings that have happened in the last just couple of years that literally like took E1 and rezoned it so that it could be developed. And there were, there's 2 parcels in the same area of town, and then a third that I can think of in the Whitaker area. And I'm just wondering if that is captured somehow, and how maybe it's captured. Because to me, it's like, it's land that's, it's probably not yet developed. I mean, I don't know that they've pulled any permits yet, to be honest, but I'm guessing that if 3 happened in the last several years, like over the monitoring period, it's happened more than just those 3 rezonings. So if there is rezoning that has happened in order for something to be developed, because it otherwise wouldn't have been, I'm just wondering if that was captured, if that makes sense at all. So
it was rezoned from
Yeah.
E1 to something else.
yeah, so I mean, Phil, you're aware of it, I'm guessing. Shepherd Motors, it's built, that's going to do they're putting a dealership out in what was E1. I believe it went through with council and everything else. I don't actually recall, but I just know that it was something in place. So I'm going to use that as just an example. But if, that was land that had sat for quite some time, had not been developed, and then was being rezoned so that they could develop it. And there's another parcel, that's kind of in that same area as well. So I'm just wondering if that's being captured at all, because my understanding is that zoning in particular, and if you guys know, it's like out by Chad Drive, that whole area out there is E1, and it's sat for a long time. And so developers have said, and some of you that kind of know the world of development better than I do, have said that it's not useful as that zone for a lot of people because of the sizes of the parcels or whatever else. So I'm just wondering if that's captured at all when that occurs in order for something to be developed, that there's a rezoning.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, or do you want to just jump in?
Well, sure. So it's interesting because I-1 campus industrial was the original zoning of that area. And then we actually rezoned it to E1 as an efficiency measure. And then there were other parts of the city that we rezoned to E2 as an efficiency measure.
Yep.
So if it's changing back to, or changing to something else, we can look into that. The question of, are we tracking rezones that are done for the purposes of helping development happen? No, because that would be like, we have to ask them, why are you doing that? You know what I mean? But we can certainly, and we haven't done this yet because we haven't really focused on land use applications other than for the density component. We are trying to monitor rezones. And so we have what the zone was and what it's going to. And I mean, frankly, you could argue if somebody's going from ag to R1, they're rezoning it for the purposes of developing it. But other things are going to get they would need more investigation to know. But we can document rezones in general. I'm not sure if we need it for this report, but we can definitely put it as a recommendation because that is our intent to get that in this report. We just didn't have time to.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, that does. And thank you for humoring my question.
Yeah, no, we'll look at that because now I'm curious.
Yeah. So I've got John followed by Sue, and I will take my hand down.
Thanks. Yeah, a couple of things. I'm going down a little bit further into the document now, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but I'm into the efficiency measures. Would that be appropriate to talk about at this time, or do we want to wait? It's still in this bullet pad.
I think that's fine if you want to jump into efficiency measures.
Okay, so for me, yeah, that was what Tiffany brought up was something that I was going to mention when we talked about efficiency numbers, because efficiencies were one of the things that we put in there to spur development on inside the UGB to help build our numbers up. And the numbers that I'm seeing and what's been documented in this report is that the efficiency measures aren't working to the extent that we thought they would work. And, given Tiffany's, what she just mentioned, the E2 or the E1 campus industrial, we've actually seen documented uses on that land that weren't compatible and asked for a rezone. And when I dug into the appendices, it looked like the only efficiency measure that worked close to what we were hoping for was enterprise zones. And correct me if I'm wrong, but enterprise zones need to come down from a federal level, and then we can enact them, right? It wasn't just enacted at a local level. So something that I would like to have at least highlighted is that the efficiency measures that we put in there for job creation or employment development haven't done what we hoped they were. Are there other types of efficiency measures that we should look at, such as, we're seeing that commercial is more needed than E1. So would it be appropriate to, again, I might be getting into policy here, but I don't want to do that. But when I saw, when we enacted and looked at all these different efficiency measures, we had metrics that we were supposed to hit, and we're not getting close to it on any of them. So that's just a comment. And then going down further onto page.
Sorry,
52.
John, I need to jump in here. So we say in the snapshot, I thought we were being clear on this, but maybe what we need to do is bold this, is that overall efficiency measures for employment development have not yet succeeded in spurring additional employment development as intended. So it sounds like you're feeling like either that was lost or it's not.
No, I just think that's an important piece to be brought up. Yeah, I don't know if the way you want to do that is highlighting it or whatever, but to me that was something that jumped out. And then I just had a question about some terminology that I wasn't familiar with. So if we go down to page 52, in the third under commercial land, it says on vacant land, it says redevelopment policies and trends towards online purchasing may be influencing the low numbers of acres developed. Can you explain to me what you mean by online purchasing and why that would affect the amount of redevelopment? I don't know what that meant, and I'm fairly familiar.
I think what we meant by that was that people aren't necessarily shopping as much at brick and mortar stores. And so the employment development demand may not be as high because people are ordering online.
Okay, so I thought it was talking about purchasing of properties, not of retail purchasing.
Retail purchasing, yes.
Okay,
we can rephrase.
Yeah, I mean, just because we're talking about developing land, developing
Right.
acres, all of this, and you're
Right.
talking about purchasing, to me, that's a developer purchasing property for redevelopment. So,
Yes.
Okay, that clears that up. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Sue, you've been very patient.
It's okay. It's helped me refine my thoughts. So I want to go back to what Kevin requested in the beginning, which was, is there a demand projection for industrial land? And I think it's important, two things to remember. One is that industrial lands is completely different than residential lands, totally different. We went through this with Envision Eugene in the very beginning. It was a long struggle in the early stages of the TRG to understand that it's important to have these different categories of industrial land available and set aside. Because frankly, as you can look back in the last 2 or 3 years, it is impossible to predict what is needed. And you have to have a cushion there of a variety of different kinds of sizes and zones in order to accommodate the potential for what actually fundamentally underlies the economy of our entire community. So that's my first point, is that it is different than residential land. We have to think further ahead, and we have to be patient. So then my second comment is about time. We have had so little time to gather data, and to draw conclusions at this point just frankly drives me crazy. It is too early to draw the conclusions that some of us are drawing, because we have had the weirdest 2 or 3 years of our, past probably 20 years. And so to assume from this data that we've made mistakes or anything like that, or we've overprojected or underprojected, it's, in my opinion, it is too early, and we need to be patient, and we need to make sure that we are just creating the structure and the criteria for sorting the data and the information, and draw the conclusions later. And actually, we aren't going to be drawing the conclusions, the policymakers will be. I know it comes off as sounding kind of, dissing some of the comments that have been made, and I don't intend that at all. I just think it's too early for us to draw some of these conclusions that we're drawing when we have only this small amount of data and a brand new structure through which to filter it. Thank you.
Sue, I got Phil next.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sue. I think that's a great observation. And, I think getting back to the thing that you talked about, Tiffany, the zone change I know that Shepherd Motors did was just simply because, E1 doesn't allow for car sales. E2 does. And, it's kind of a relatively simpler stretch to go through that kind of a zone change. And they did it for the purposes of, hey, it's right along the highway, and it's super visible. So kind of totally makes sense. And those kind of things are going to happen over time, and they'll be the one-offs exactly like what Sue's talking about. I guess I would like to, just again advise collectively, or the powers that be and staff, that, it is worth evaluating the efficacy of these efficiency measures and the code itself. Maybe early to do so relative to, what's going on right now in the pandemic. But there may be some reasons why, and it could be worth combing through, say, the E1. Why is it that we aren't seeing as much employment growth in E1 as we thought we would have, given that we liberalized maybe some provisions, but not others that may be material? So that's kind of, again, a SOFA item of future work that may be done, of just probing into the code a little bit. And this is future work that maybe staff and the development community can kind of do together. And I think one other thing too is that, the West Eugene Enterprise Zone's been around for a long time. It used to be located also in the E1, basically the campus industrial E1 zone too, but was removed, I believe, by council directive, and I'm not sure when. That may have had some effect as well. I really don't know, but I mean, it's worth maybe just thinking about. One other thing though is just the, and this gets into, let's see, I'm trying to find here, page 1, this goes back maybe page 116 of the appendix. And it's just, again, use of terms and maybe, just to ease of following along for, the uninitiated too. Whereas you start at the beginning under employment and development land, talking about there's 4 different types that you're evaluating: land designations, commercial, industrial, government, and education and research. So when we look at land, we're looking at these land use categories, and it'll be mapped, I guess, as well, based upon that. But then at the bottom of that same page, when we talk about the permits, it talks about uses. And then it talks about commercial non-retail, commercial retail, industrial, and government or semi-public. Again, most of the permits that have been issued have probably been because of schools, Autzen Stadium, pool rehab, whatever, more along that end than they have been in the others. So that's where I think getting back to what John was suggesting of mapping these out, I think it's going to be pretty illustrative and handy to have. And you'll probably hear the policymakers ask for something like that too. So let it go. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? Phil, so you started out talking about the plan designation categories versus the uses. And we know that they're different because plan designation categories are that. And then the uses are, these uses can all happen on those different plan designation categories. So I just wanted to make sure, were you saying it was confusing having those two groups, or do we?
I don't know. I mean, I was just thinking, like, whereas I know in the housing portion, we were able to be, I think a little bit more clear. And you did have all these different maps that talked about by BLI's, designation. And so you would break down like how we were doing with residential development within land use, low density residential, or within medium density or high density or commercial. And a lot of new medium density housing has been occurring in that zoning district or that designation. And so I just want to see that maybe is there any conflict or confusion that somebody would have, just as we were talking about differences between job numbers and land numbers. And when you go by, here you go, plan designation, is there going to be any confusion by somebody when you show a chart like this and you are counting it by land plan designation, but your permits are done by use? And I will just make one other comment too, just about the average reader. Sometimes, especially on, say, the table that's on page 118, you've got five or six different, 5 categories, and they're all blue. Hopefully, I don't know really what the deal is with people who are colorblind. If it's, hopefully it's not blue. But maybe there is, some easier way to distinguish these different gradients of blue or color that's used to make it a little bit more legible. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to read, like which one is that and which one is that, and they seem a little close, and maybe one can be shaded, and just to distinguish it better and make it more visible.
Yeah, we did. I know it's tricky. So and then I'll stop. But we did try to stick with, because there's so much data in here. We tried to do oranges for housing and population, and then we tried to do blues for jobs and employment building permits. And it gets tricky because when you start having multiple categories, then it's hard to get that variation. So what we tried to do was make sure that the legend was in the same order from left to right, from top to bottom. And so that's something we could call out as well. We can certainly try to work on these colors some more, but
I get it, and I don't think it's really as much a color issue as since and I get it's a methodology that makes sense.
yeah.
If one of these maybe had a hatch to it, maybe that distinguishes it, and then it becomes more evident as you just described. And I think I didn't really snap to the fact of like, oh yeah, the one on the bottom is the one on the top left. The next one next to it, and so on. If you just did one of those, I think people would be able to get that match, or that of your methodology. But
Okay. Well, Thank you. No, this is great. This is awesome. Thank you. The other thing we can do is add some text, top to bottom, left to right. We could add some notation on the side, we might even have a section in the beginning that says, here's how to read one of these charts. So thank you for that feedback.
Okay, Lisa, you had your hand up, but you took it down, so I'm guessing got the question answered. So I don't have any.
I can just say I wanted to appreciate Sue's comment very much. And I think I really agree with her analysis that we might be trying to make declaratory statements too soon, that we still need to be gathering data. And I think one thing we haven't really talked about is how the world itself is changing, and not every job is at a brick and mortar spot. A lot of people are now working remotely. They might be working in Eugene, but their job's in New York, or vice versa. And so I just wanted to appreciate what Sue said, and realize that there are many factors that might influence how employment or building permits or whatever it is, employment development is not matching what we anticipated. Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to move on? Go to the next page or whatever, Elena? I don't know.
I think we're on, well, done. We can move past employment entirely and go to other metrics, or
Okay.
unless, there is a section, the employment development land supply section. If anyone touched on it a little bit, but
Okay, I'll just ask if anybody had, Phil has come here, so he has his hand up, but just really quick, I just want to say, I think what's most helpful in this process is as you're reading through things and making notes on, whatever is kind of what I've been doing. I just kind of printed it out, and then as we go through it, we, rather than have, Elena and Heather have to kind of walk us through it, just call out any thoughts. And that's basically what we've been doing, but I think that system will work well if we can do that. So Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess this gets into, again, one more thing in the efficiency measures and the brownfield assessment. And I get that that's something that's probably super easy for you guys to track. It's, because the city had this grant, or the city and cities in the county had this grant to do some remediation of brownfield sites. Is that are you counting only those sites that have been doing that? Or is there and did I miss it, that there's a broader series of sites, or, it's based upon DEQ data that may or may not have been supported with the brownfield assessment or remediation grants, and it occurs anywhere?
I'm not entirely sure if I followed your question or not.
I guess I'm just trying to get at, is the efficiency measure. So whereas say the downtown programs, or, you've got the efficiency measure is how many acres are being developed that are within the, for employment within the downtown urban rural district or the riverfront district, or have been done with coordination and incentives that the city has available to it. Get that. And you can evaluate that. With the brownfield assessment, I guess I wasn't sure if you are using the efficiency measure as only those brownfields that are done through this grant program that the city had, and is, now the funding is expired and maybe it's being renewed, or is it being done, if another developer maybe didn't take advantage of the city's grant, or the grant funds exhausted, but there was still some cleanup of a project and a site that then became usable outside of that grant fund?
So it is just properties that utilize the grant fund, because we are monitoring those through our community development program. And so that's what we're capturing.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, is there any ability to kind of go, look at that? That's great data to have. But are there opportunities where properties are being reclaimed, maybe outside the boundaries of those grant funds, or once they're exhausted or whatever, and otherwise maybe data that you could glean from DEQ sources or something like that, or a different way or a different place?
So an efficiency measure is supposed to be an action the city took, some way the city is changing things that will help land develop more compactly or develop at all. And so that's why these are all very city focused I was going to say functions, efficiency measures. Yeah, so we're pretty limited to, yeah. Mhm.
Well, that totally makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay, I got a couple more hands up. We got Kevin and then John.
So I think page 51 of the report, I just wondered if it would be helpful to sort of have a key question of what percentage of employment development land has adequate infrastructure, or you could kind of call out the obverse, what percentage of land that we have that we're counting that actually doesn't have the infrastructure. You make reference in the text, you describe Crow Road and you describe the new land in the northwest corner of the city where you've got, the city's got plans and funding in place to move forward with infrastructure. But I think it would be just useful to know, is that 25% of our land that we're saying we want to reserve for industrial or employment-based stuff, or is it 2%? I just think that might be helpful.
Sorry.
You keep
Thought I
muting and
was muted.
unmuting.
So we have this right here, have lands for employment become available through infrastructure extension, which is what that's trying to get at, is, are there more lands available? Are there more lands that are served with infrastructure than there were before? And then we kind of break it out a little bit more, and I'm realizing that this terminology, short-term land supply, is from the OARs, and that's what it's about. Like, is at least 25% of your employment land served? So we probably need to fix that because no one's going to know what that means. And so in the when we get to the BLI discussion, we didn't do exactly that. We used annexation as a proxy for whether or not it is served. It's not a perfect proxy, but we did look at both employment and residential and by plan designation, and indicated how much of the land supply and how much of the capacity assumed on that land supply is unannexed versus annexed. And again, that's not perfect because some of the land that is not annexed probably does have services up to it, but a lot of it we know doesn't. And so that it's trying to get at that, but it's not a perfect analysis.
Sean.
Thank you. So this is going back a little bit to kind of what Sue said, and I get what you're saying, Sue, but I also feel that we can glean things from this data. We don't have to make 20-year conclusions from it, but there is going to be another UGB analysis coming up. And this is going to be one of the tools I assume that will be used in doing that UGB analysis. So when I talk about efficiencies that may or may not be working 8 years into this plan or wherever we're at, if we're doing another UGB analysis and relying on efficiency measures that we see are falling far short, I think it should be called out. You know, even if we're not 20 or 15 years into it. I'm not saying that we need to take this data and make concrete decisions on it, but use it to help us move forward when we do go to the next UGB analysis. Even though they're not complete numbers, if we wait for complete numbers, we're waiting till 2032. And we'll have complete numbers in 2032, but things are going to happen between now and then. So, you know, I'm not trying to put the cart in front of the horse, but also know that there is a cart with a horse pulling it on this road. And we know that. And being able to get the information that we can from it in a useful manner will be helpful.
I guess I'm just going to make an observation and maybe building upon something that John said before. And I think it might not be a bad idea to have, you know, some bold type for some of these takeaways. And sometimes when I was going through either the report or the appendix, you know, I wasn't sure exactly how closely they were tracking. So for example, the takeaway that is on page 129 of the appendix, and I think that, you know, is kind of just sort of the biggest takeaway of this whole part of the study, where you're mentioning that 1,457 acres is kind of needed. Over the monitoring period, 278.6 acres were developed from employment permits. And that next sentence, if this trend continues, the forecast amount of development will not be met by 2032. Now, as we've been talking about, lots could change. Portion of the industrial land that, you know, the next sentence and so forth goes on. But that seems like an enormous takeaway and something that's kind of buried in here that just struck me as like super important. I didn't see that on page 52 of the report where you have the snapshot. And in fact, the numbers were a little bit different. It's 286 acres were developed from employment building permits, and you had 278.6 in the appendix. Maybe a little congruence check that you want to do, but it didn't really pop out here in the report like it did to me, at least, reading it in the appendix. So, and maybe I just missed it if it's kind of really, you know, front and center highlighted elsewhere in the report.
Perfect. That's exactly the feedback we want.
Good job, Phil. Gold star. Hey.
I was up late last night.
I don't see any other hands, so
Ready to move past employment development?
I think so.
All right.
Looking good on time. We have another hour, so we're halfway through.
This is my favorite section. Other metrics. We didn't do them. We ran out of time, you guys. We wish we had time to do it. Maybe it's my least favorite section because we didn't do it. It's my favorite in brevity. But you know, we really wanted to rerun the 20-minute neighborhood analysis to see, you know, back right at the same time we did Envision Eugene, we did a 20-minute neighborhood analysis heat map that shows what parts of the city can meet their daily needs within 20-minute walking, and it kind of goes out in color the further away you get from the center of wherever those commercial services are. We really wanted to rerun that and we just did not have time. And so, you know, I didn't want to skip over this because I think that's really important. And I think that when we get to the next step of the monitoring program where we're looking at quality of life indicators, I think, oh, I love that there's all these questions on something that we didn't have anything to say about. You guys are the best. You know, we do intend this to be part of that quality of life indicator monitoring, the kind of companion piece to what we've been doing so far. And then I'll just really quickly say, how many jobs received other incentives such as development loans? Again, early on, we were like, anything the city is doing, we need to document, you know, anything the city is doing to invest in jobs and invest in housing, we need to document and we need to put it in the monitoring program. And, you know, we just bit off more than we could chew. That information's tracked. Community development does that work. They have their own reports that provide that information. We might look at linking to those reports, but we don't have that in here. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Okay, Sue, Kevin, Dennis, in that order.
Okay, I just had a quick question about page 55, the second paragraph. I don't understand what this, let's see, where is it here? Are you on page 55? Second paragraph.
50, 53, 50.
No, 55. Second paragraph, residential capacity. Yeah, okay, the second paragraph there where in parentheses, it says until the jurisdiction has documentation of middle housing production since code amendments. What does that mean?
Okay, can we come back to that when we get
Of course.
to this section?
Sure.
Let's put Sue in the queue first.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Kevin, go ahead.
So Heather, I just wanted to point out with your comment about wanting to do the 20-minute walkable neighborhood heat map, that if you look at page 148 in the appendix, which mapped out available lands for residential development, I'm going to guess that most of that land is well outside of a 20-minute walking distance. Just kind of an observation.
And the heat map that we do, yeah, that's great. That's the kind of analysis we would want to put those things together. The heat map that we do analyzes all existing dwellings. So it's not just where we don't have dwellings, but I mean, that's a great second step to do for sure. Like what does that mean for our land supply and where, and the point is to identify where we need to plan for more 20-minute neighborhoods. Thank you.
Dennis, you're up.
Yeah, and just another comment on that whole question of 20-minute neighborhoods. I think it's an important one from what I'm hearing from the discussions from policymakers. You know, that is certainly an issue in the CAP 2.0 climate action plan that the city is deeply committed on. So as the Sustainability Commission guy here, I want to highlight, I think that that's really an important issue to continue to look at because policymakers are looking at that as well. And another issue, and I'm not sure where it can fit, that's related again to CAP 2.0 factors is our definition of vacant land. What might be timbered land and what might be undeveloped entire, you know, rundown meadow that needs to be mowed twice a year land is a factor and a question that I know has come up at council. The mayor in particular has asked about more middle housing and its relationship to tree removal. So again, that likely is in the couch or refrigerator or whatever we call it. But I'm hoping that CAP 2.0 is in people's awareness as we're looking at how we encourage what kind of land development because of all the environmental impacts it has, whether that's urban canopy or transportation issues.
Sorry, you were hard to hear there.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. I'm glad Dennis brought that up because previous discussions here at ETAC, we brought up how does our planning in this realm speak to or meet the criteria in the Eugene Climate Action Plan? And I'd love to hear the staff respond to Dennis, because in the past we've been told that that's a policy issue. So, but I think it's not a policy issue. I agree with Dennis that these are both critical components. All these things are critical to consider, and they intersect. So how does the staff take into account other initiatives that the city is pursuing related to climate and our growth?
How does the staff take that into account in monitoring? So monitoring, we are measuring the development that's happening. And we are doing that in the context of the UGB analysis. So what we need for doing the assumptions that we made previously for doing the UGB analysis. And those are defined and required by state statute. So we're in a box. There are other processes going on, like the housing implementation plan, the CAP, which get to do planning outside of the UGB box. I'm not saying that there's not overlap. We're certainly coordinating with those programs. It's just that in the terms of monitoring, we are providing data and measurements of development trends and population trends, or population and job growth trends. I think those questions, like we were talking about earlier, so maybe this is one that goes in the policy discussion list, is, you know, or maybe it's part of the UG, maybe it's something that goes with the UGB analysis, is, are there actions that are happening, efforts that are happening in other planning areas that the city is doing that we could adopt as an efficiency measure or as an inefficiency measure if they're actually reducing the amount of development that would be allowed on what we would otherwise count as a developable piece of property. That happens at the UGB analysis. So it's not part of monitoring, because you're just checking in on the assumptions you had and what has happened since then. You're not, I know this is so hard, but I do think that that's something we could work on, you know, as far as maybe the couch, not the policy. I think there's two different things, but the couch could be, you know, during the UGB analysis, make sure to check in. I'm saying this very simply. We would need to be much more articulate than I'm being, but make sure that we look at other programs like the CAP work, the HIP work, parks planning work, whatever it is, and see if there's efforts that are going on related that are efficiency measures that, or that would impact, or in either way, negatively or positively, our developable land. And then that can be part of the, I mean, just like what's happening with the middle housing code amendments, and what happens at the UGB analysis, it becomes a policy discussion. Whereas right here, we don't make those.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there still might be, and maybe down the line, even before a couch, ways to think about it. I think we've had a discussion in this group about like commercial property that has large parking lot surface areas, how with the city's emphasis on more accessible public transportation, walkable neighborhoods, bikeable neighborhoods, that part of efficiency measures might be putting more commercial property on what now is reserved for parking. So you'd actually free up land to develop for commercial purposes. So,
Right, so there's a missing step that has to happen. So the policy discussion has to happen that says, we want to create more redevelopment, and looking at our growth monitoring report or and other information, we feel like we need more efficiency measures. So what are those going to be? Those could be looking at rezoning land. I think Lisa is what you talked about last time, rezoning developed land to make it easier to redevelopment. So once that policy decision and direction and proposal happens, then what might come back to this group is not whether or not to go forward with that. It would be more looking at the capacity analysis we assumed from doing that policy change, just like we're doing now, where we readopted MUPD and we have these downtown efficiency measure strategies. We made some estimates about what kind of capacity would come out of those by doing those actions. The technical resource group before you analyzed that capacity, and they didn't say that the efficiency measures were right or wrong. They said, yes, we feel like this is the right amount of capacity essentially that we should see. And now what we're doing is trying to measure those assumptions. So there's that missing step that needs to happen before the analysis of the efficiency measure comes back to this group. Yeah.
thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
thank you.
Got to keep reminding ourselves to open up our viewpoint. Yeah.
Okay, so that was great. I'm gonna go ahead and move us on to buildable lands inventory. I'm gonna turn it over to Thea. Thea, I don't know if do you want me to answer this question? Because I think I wrote this. Yeah, so Sue's question. So I think it's this, Sue, right? Recent changes in state law regarding middle housing allow for a city to assume an increase of up to 3% of additional housing capacity through increased density assumptions. Until the jurisdiction has documentation of middle housing production since code amendments. Yeah, we're missing some words there. It helps to read it out loud sometimes. So I take full blame on that one. What I was trying to say is that we are allowed to assume, and if Ed was here, he would remind us that it's up to a 3% bump in capacity. It doesn't have to be 3%. But the next time we do our UGB analysis, we can assume up to a 3% increase in capacity because of the code amendments, until the time that we actually have data through the monitoring program that says this is actually what we're getting, as in this is what we're really seeing. So it's because the code amendments, as soon as they go into effect, we're not going to have any data about how effective they are, but we might be doing UGB planning. And so the state specifically put in this allowance for you to assume no more than 3% of an increase in capacity.
Alexis, sorry.
I don't know if you want to get into this level of detail in this description, but you're allowed to assume more than 3% if you show data from other communities or other areas that are zoned in a way that would show that. But like I said, I don't know if you want to get into that with this description.
Well, clearly I need to rewrite this part. So I will rewrite it. I think the point was we were just trying to, maybe what I can do is put a footnote here instead and actually put what the OAR actually says instead of trying to paraphrase it. I'm going to turn it over to Thea.
John's got his hand up, so.
I'll I'll let Thea do whatever she wants, and then I've just got a comment on the BLI section.
What about Phil? You got your hand up. Do you want to?
Just whenever is a good time after John.
Okay.
You can go ahead and ask your question, John, or comment.
It's not so much of a question. It's just, for me, it's a takeaway from this section. So when I go through and I read this section, the chart that jumps out to me is on page 56, future X. I suppose X is supposed to mean something there, but and well, there's two things. There's one that I think we might have a typo, but if you look under employment lands, there's commercial and there's an acre, and then there's commercial and then there's acres. Are there two different types of commercials? So you got that commercial there, and then right below it, it says commercial, and it has another 1,100 acres. I understand the other ones. So that you can explain that when it's time. The question, or the thing that jumps out to me, is that 40% of residential lands is in unannexed or unserved because it doesn't have the services. 58% of our employment lands are unserved, i.e. unannexed. To me, that goes to the cost of getting development built. If 40% of our residential land is unserved, it harks me back to the TRG when we were talking about phantom lands, phantom growth lands that were like, yep, they're in the BLI and they can be built on. But if there's not infrastructure to them, or the infrastructure is so costly that it makes it uneconomical, it never pencils out to build on, we're counting them still in the BLI. And so I know that they're in there, but at some way, I think we need to flag that 40% of our residential lands is going to have a significant amount of costs involved with it, either from the city or from the developmental community, to make these lands buildable. And I don't know if that is called out enough. And then, yeah, just the second question about why there's two different commercial acres.
Hey, do you want me to talk about the commercial numbers? So that was just supposed to be a header. So it's like commercial as a grouping. So this is where we have our terminologies, but there's commercial plan designations as a grouping, and then under it there's commercial plan designation, commercial mixed use, whatever the other four were. So that's why it's in. Sorry, I shouldn't have jumped ahead.
So that might be just commercial plan designation. Like on the other ones, you've got industrial, and then it's broken down into campus industrial.
Can you remind me when it's 56?
We're on page 56.
Yeah, so see, this is like a category, and
right.
Then because the BLI, when we did the BLI, we actually collapsed everything that was these four commercial plan designations into one commercial plan designation category.
Yeah, so maybe if on the first line, if you just said commercial plan designation or something, it was just confusing to me.
Got it. And then I'll just keep going. I'm going to go back to, and we can come back to this when we talk about the executive summary. But we do have this so this is just the portion about the updated BLI in the executive summary. And so we bolded that 40% of low and medium density residential is unannexed, 63% of industrial, but a lot of that is the Clear Lake area, expansion area, because it's not served. And then we kind of broke residential down a little bit further to or sorry, this was broken down further, that this was broken down further about the amount that is sloped and the size. So anyway, I'm hoping that that did it here, and it sounds like maybe we just need to do that same emphasis lower in the report.
Well, I think the thing that would be helpful is the correlation between unannexed and the cost involved in annexation and bringing services. You know, you just say, okay, services aren't there, but you know, how much is it going to cost to bring sewer, water, electricity to these things? It's actually economic. We're saying it's unannexed, but what that means is that there's a huge economic burden to servicing those lands. And I don't know if that's captured.
Okay, here it is. So our very first, let's see, nope, it's not the first one. There's the one about. I thought we did have it in the recommendations about services. I'm just not seeing it. Okay, thank you. I don't want to, we'll look at that some more.
I feel like I agree with you, Heather. I feel like I recall reading something. So anyway, Lisa, go ahead. I'm looking as well.
Thank you. I'm wondering about the 40% number and the unannexed lands. If in addition to the observation John had, if those lands are some of the unannexed portions that are out in the River Road area. You know, when you look at a map of Eugene and you look at unannexed and annexed land, you got that mishmash. How much of that might be figuring into that number?
That's a good question. And it's actually relatively low. I know that we ran those numbers and it was shockingly low because what we're talking about here is just undeveloped and partially vacant land. And the majority of those unannexed properties within the River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods actually are developed. So it doesn't make up that large of a portion of these, of the 40% that we're talking about here.
This is a question kind of relating to the last meeting, and I was trying to follow and then see how it related to this language. It's on page 56, I'm sorry, under the heading of 2021 residential capacity estimate. And it says there's capacity for over 12,000 homes on vacant and partially vacant residentially designated land within the UGB. Did that include, and you had, I think it was on page 35, and y'all talked about it last time. Does that include the shortage of 8,200 units that was identified earlier in the report?
You're talking about the underproduction, that shortage?
You had this, you know, identification that there was a shortage of 8,200 units, and y'all talked about it, and you gave it an explanation that I just had a little bit of a hard time.
Right. So
seeing if it relate to this or not, you know.
No, because what that was trying to get at was that in the UGB process, right now the OARs direct you to plan for growth, and what the recent work at the state level, the state did a draft regional housing needs analysis for the whole state. And they tried to get at more than just planning for your growth projection, but planning for what undersupply you already have in the community, as well as planning for folks that are experiencing homelessness. So you have a more complete picture of what your demand is. than just planning based on the PSU population forecast. And so this is about just looking at the buildable lands inventory today and saying, if we just look at the vacant and partially vacant acres, how much capacity, theoretical capacity is on those? It's not matching it to demand yet.
Would it be worth kind of making, note of that? So that somebody doesn't reach the same kind of mistaken thought that I had of like, oh, well, there's, all this capacity, but, that's just the land supply. Maybe I'm just not reading it right, but I appreciate that clarification.
Right, I'm not seeing any other hands. Heather, question about that. This area, the section we were just on, I apologize. It was the other metrics. Are we gonna just, is that coming out?
It could. You mean not
No.
include it in the report?
Well, I didn't know if you were. I don't know. I just didn't know since we didn't provide all of those metrics. I just didn't know if we're leaving that in there or I don't know. Anyway.
I was kind of as a placeholder for the next time we do the comprehensive report. We plan on filling this out, but we certainly, if that's confusing to have it in here, because it's like, what's the point? We'll just, we can add it into the next one and not keep it in here if you guys think it's odd. Which
I would just say
totally
maybe,
understand.
maybe there should maybe add a caveat in just that, what it's intended and, I don't know.
Put it on the sofa.
Yeah. Just put it on the couch.
Sure, yeah. we
I don't
can
know.
do
I
that.
just, I just don't know if it serves a purpose if I like the questions that were the key questions and things like that, but then it, maybe a caveat saying that these are the questions we would be, we would be asking, but we don't have the actual data in here. And so I guess I just don't want it to be in there if it's not. Anyway. Just my thought.
Sure.
Note that I just wrote. So Dennis has his hand up.
Yeah, the other approach would be, as I heard kind of suggested there, the key questions for future analysis, if it's going to be included in the report. That's what I kind of, the sense of what I heard you saying, Heather. And I think that could be valuable to policymakers. For one thing, they can determine, do they want to ask for more data in that area? So that's, particularly, like I said, that whole 20-minute neighborhood is consistent with, CAP 2.0 in terms of the climate action plan and other issues we know are already percolating. So, you can kind of count on there's going to be a desire for more analysis of that. So let policymakers know we'll get to it later so they don't start pushing for it now. That to know that it's outside of the scope of this report, but it's certainly consistent with the intention of information you're hoping to provide for them.
Okay, so quick time check, 7:05. So that gives us 25 minutes. Are we ready to move on to the next section that we are covering today? I do want to try to keep us on track. Everybody good?
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I guess one thing we did want to show you is that there is a link. Thea, can you remind me where the placeholder is for the link, the map?
It is in the appendix.
Okay. There. I love it when we highlight the things that we don't have in yet. It's very helpful. So we mentioned, I guess it was Kevin brought up that we've got these maps that are in the appendix that show, you know, the updated land supply if we were to start UGB planning analysis right now. And that was that, you know, the methodology you all looked at. So we've got residential and employment, and they're color coded by plan designation. They have put together a web map. So it looks like the EETAC web map that you looked at before, but it has less information and it's kind of simplified so that the legend is just kind of the oranges for residential and the blues for employment, kind of keeping in theme with our report. So Thea, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to say more about this map.
I'll just say that you can click on any property, you can get information about the plan designation, about how many acres we're estimating are developable, the slope of the lot, if there's more than one plan designation on the lot. And then if you actually go over to that filter button on the far left, you can filter the data by plan designation and drill down into some more information. It takes a while to filter at the city level, but just allows people to explore the data a lot more than a print map would.
So again, not that we're asking for feedback on this. You all have already seen the more detailed version, but we did want to let you know that that map is going to be accessible to everyone once we push this to Planning Commission. Okay, so I'm going to jump into.
I'm gonna let Sue go real quick.
Oh,
She's-
sorry, I didn't see
Nope, it's
hands.
okay. Sorry.
It's just a compliment. I think these interactive maps are just unbelievable. It is such a gift to anybody who wants to pursue it any further. You know, it's dynamic, it's amazing, incredible. The report is amazing, but those interactive maps are really unbelievable. Thank you.
Concur. I
Let's
just
see
worry
here.
about people who are going to spend a lot of time on them. I mean, we are here for a reason, but the average Joe is spending a lot of time on there. I don't know. Be a little worried about them. I'm kidding.
Yeah, and that, you know, we try to emphasize this is a monitoring snapshot. It's not getting adopted. It's just trying to show you the status of the land supply right now for this part of it. So, and this is getting a little bit, I think, to Phil, what you maybe were thinking about is, so we have this information that says, we can fit about 12,000 of our or our buildable lands snapshot right now, our 2021 snapshot can fit about 12,000 units on the vacant and partially vacant land using the densities that are kind of a mixture right now of our adopted density assumptions and new monitoring assumptions. Because as you recall, we didn't update the density assumptions where we didn't have enough data, which was mostly on sloped land. We didn't have enough data. So what happens when you at a high level take our updated buildable lands inventory and take our new, take some of the key data from monitoring and put them together to just kind of get a sense at a high level of where things are at? Because I think that there is a lot of important information, but I think that the decision makers are also going to want to know, and it gives them a bit of a preview of the UGB analysis. Even though we'll rerun all of this again, It just kind of gives you a sense. So all we did was we took the new inventory and the capacity assumed on it. And then we said, okay, well, if you take the new PSU population forecast for Eugene and we update the number of people per household from the census data, which didn't change very much. And then you update the number of persons that are in group quarters. And like I said already about the densities, what does that mean for your demand and how does that compare? So if we wanted to say, what's our 2021 demand and how does that compare to our 2021 supply? So that's what we did for residential. And we did the same thing for employment. We just took the employment growth rate. That was a little bit funky, I will say. We actually did update the employment growth rate, but we didn't use the new OED forecast because it was really high because we saw a bunch of growth up through 2019. And so we actually took the midpoint, the growth point that would, or the growth rate that would be the midpoint of the adopted rate and the OED forecast, kind of thinking we're almost halfway through our monitor or through the planning period. And so using the midpoint, again, we'll reassess all of this when we do the UGB analysis, but just to give us a high level estimate that seemed reasonable. We used the new employment densities that we got in monitoring, which didn't change very much. And then one of the things we did is we omitted the assumption that we are currently assuming in the UGB analysis, that all of the jobs that we lost in the 2006 recession would repopulate, go back into the buildings that they were in, or not originally, but those jobs that were lost will go back into existing buildings. So they didn't actually need any land, any more new land. It's kind of, it's what we call, it's like, it's infill, but it's infill without needing any new land. So we got rid of that assumption because I think we're just going to be in a very different situation when we do the UGB analysis the next time. And it was a pretty large number. It may be that we do the same thing because we did lose jobs in COVID. But for now, it felt like too big of a number to keep assuming, especially since it was from 2006. So what that means is that this produced a preliminary updated estimate of demand for 2021 through 2041 for about 15,000, almost 16,000 new dwellings and about 24,000, almost 25,000 new jobs. When we compare the updated demand to the updated buildable lands inventory, I don't know if I said preliminary enough. I could certainly throw in about 55 more times that I said this because I really don't want anybody to take this and run with it. But there is a preliminary forecasted shortage of land in the UGB for the next 20 years for housing, particularly for medium density residential and high density residential land, and for jobs, particularly for commercial, not for industrial. So these are my caveats. These are high level estimates that we'll relook at the UGB. And particularly what I want to point out is that I didn't change our redevelopment estimates. Those might look pretty different based on or considering the redevelopment we've seen in monitoring. I didn't account for additional needs for parks and utilities. And so acquiring vacant land for parks reduces the amount of capacity in your land supply. And that was pretty significant. It was like 110 acres, I think, in the last UGB analysis. So I didn't account for that. So that's why I say this is really high level, but it does give us a sense, at least I think, which I think decision makers are going to want out of this. I think they're going to want to know, okay, well, so now we have updated information. Can you at least tell us what we think that means? And right now, I would say preliminarily, it looks like we might have a shortage. And that's also without doing efficiency measures. So there's a lot more to do. And if we don't feel comfortable having this in here, or if there's a different way to do it, I'd love to get your feedback.
Any thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment that I'm wondering if this is another place to clarify that what we're talking about is potential space for the development of 24,800 jobs rather than jobs. Because that's what we're creating here, is space for those jobs to be, for lack of a better word, housed or located, and whatever is the appropriate word.
Any other comments? Oh, John, I
Thanks.
see your hand.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that this is useful information. I think this is one of the things that they're going to want to, the policymakers are going to want to see. There will be, I assume there will be people that will jump to conclusions with these preliminary numbers. So I know you need to put this in big caveats, whatever. I did want to, can we go down one more page? I know that we're into the recommendations. Oh, wait, on my page, I'm on page 9 of the main one. So on page 9, you talked about recommendations, and there was recommendations on housing, and there was recommendations on employment. The first bullet under employment would be, it says continue to plan for infrastructure and service improvements and funding strategies for the Clear Lakes and expansion areas. I think that would be an appropriate recommendation for housing as well. To put that up above, and if we could develop a way to get infrastructure to the Crow Road area, that could take a huge burden off of 40% of our land. So I mean, not that that's going to happen, but I think that bullet point would be just as appropriate for housing as it is for industrial, because the numbers are almost identical.
I totally agree. That's what I was trying to find earlier that Tiffany also thought she saw. I swear we had that as a bullet point. So that's on me. Somehow I deleted it, I guess, or it's somewhere else, but we will definitely make that happen.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate thing, because for me, I don't want to expand the UGB for these extra things that we talked about in the paragraph above, when 40% of our buildable land inventory is not going to be built on because there's no services to it.
That makes good sense to me as well. Anybody, any other thoughts, you guys? So Heather and Elena, you guys, what are you feeling like? It looks like we're through the sections that we had on the agenda. So yay, 10 minutes early.
Wow.
Yay.
So I just want to
Rather
encourage
than-
folks, if you have any, like Mark, you sent me, sent Elena and I some minor edits. That's great. I haven't looked at them yet, but if anyone has additional edits, you know, we didn't talk about the definitions and glossary, any of that stuff that doesn't make sense, please feel free to forward that to us. So we were planning for the next meeting to, which would be January 20th, your normally scheduled meeting, to have that be kind of the wrap-up meeting of this report. So we would revisit the executive summary. But one of the things we really wanted to do in preparation for that meeting is send you 2 versions of the report, one that is track changes and one that's a cleaned up version. The track changes version has some of the comments in it that we've been taking notes on. So at ETAC, we heard this. Here's what we did with that. At ETAC, we heard this. Here's what we did with that. So it has the comments and then also has track changes in it. And we want to give that to you well enough ahead of time. We still have some work to do. As Phil pointed out, we've got we want to go back through and make sure all of our numbers are correct. That we didn't, you know, we don't have typos and things like that. And so that is going to take some time. So I think what we're planning is that we would not hold the 20th and hold the 3rd is what we're hoping to do. So we would send the report to you, back to you ahead of time. And that would be a closure meeting on the report.
Okay, so no meeting on the 20th. Okay. I have John and Dennis in the queue. So John,
I may have a conflict on the 3rd, but it hasn't come out yet. So I want to quick, if I'm not here, I just want to quick speak to next steps. And when we're presenting this, it'll go to Planning Commission first and then to City Council. Is that right? So I think it would be important to have an ETAC representative at the Planning Commission. Usually that would be the chairperson, but Tiffany, being a planning commissioner, I would love to see her sitting using her position as a planning commissioner, not as the chair of the ETAC. So I would hope that there would be somebody who would go and represent the civilian view of the ETAC along with staff at the Planning Commission. I just think
are you
that would be-
volunteering, John?
It doesn't have to be me, but I just think that, you know, Tiffany,
No, I agree.
I've been there. You don't want to have to say, this is what we did at this.
Yeah,
You know it, but if you're saying it as an ETAC member, are you the ETAC member or are you a planning commissioner? And I think that your role as a planning commissioner in that situation is more important than your advocating for the body. So I would just hope that when we get to that point, there is a representative from this group.
I support that, but I would definitely look to, first of all, anyone who would want to volunteer, and obviously I want to check with staff, see if Heather and if you guys think that that would be appropriate. I get what John's saying, and I've never been in this position before, so I do understand that it, you know, it helps for me to have, if there is another person from the ETAC with staff that can kind of present in, you know, in lieu of myself, because I think that could be kind of awkward, but there's somebody who wants to volunteer. I mean, you don't have to say anything right now. Maybe we can determine, I think my natural would be to go to my vice and see if Kevin is wanting to take that on, but I certainly, you know, if that isn't something that he's interested in doing, I'd open it up to anybody else who's wanting to do that. So
I'd be willing to, except I think it might be beneficial to have somebody who has some experience with the Planning Commission, which I don't. That's why I think John would make an incredible representative of ETAC with his deep experience, but there may be others too who have more familiarity with the Planning Commission.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go to Dennis and then Howard, and then we can revisit that that discussion. But Dennis, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just briefly, I want to offer some gratitudes. I know now I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to be in Cape Town, South Africa on February 3rd. And it will be 3:30 in the morning when this meeting would begin. I don't intend to participate live. I look forward to the recording. And I will, offer, if nothing else, some couch comments when I get an opportunity to look at the materials more fully, and the gratitude for, people assisting me with some deep learning curve. And I expect you'll see me around some various places for time to come. So thank you.
Well said, Dennis. Thank you. Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, just to circle back on who should be at the Planning Commission meeting, I would just say that when there was a joint meeting of the City Council and Lane Board of Commissioners, that John and I represented ETAC during a discussion on the which alternative for urban reserve should be adopted. So I would, certainly encourage Kevin, and if he needs backup, then maybe another ETAC member that has more experience with the Planning Commission would be appropriate. But, you two guys are the leadership right now of ETAC, and I think one of you should represent ETAC, just as John and I represented ETAC previously.
I appreciate your feedback. Okay. I think, I'm willing to give it some thought, and if anybody else wants to kind of reach out and I'm happy to obviously represent the ETAC. I'm on Planning Commission, so I'm going to be there. So, but I do think that
I think you guys can talk about it at next step. The only reason I brought it up was because there is a chance that I might not be at that meeting, and I wanted the issue brought up. So it doesn't have to be decided tonight.
Okay, let's do that. Let's couch that. Let's put that on the couch. We can talk about it on the 3rd, if that works for everybody. And that way everyone can kind of sit on it for a bit, and no pun intended, the couch, sit on it, right? Okay. It's been a long night.
And if anyone else is not going to be at the 3rd, please let us know as soon as possible.
That sounds good.
We only have 2 minutes, but Heather, you said you were going to talk about
Oh, yes.
Ed's position.
I'll let Sue go.
Okay, Sue and then Heather.
Okay, well, I think it's really important that Tiffany is not the ETAC representative. I think she should be the Planning Commissioner. I think there needs to be a separation there. Your job as a Planning Commissioner is to be a liaison. And so I think it's really important that you stick with that role. I would highly vote for having the co-chair be there, because I think that's another important position. And then I think any of the rest of us who want to go, it always makes a good impression if the people who are involved in it are sitting there in the audience. So, I think several of us should show up, or could show up. I'm not saying could show up, and it would be a powerful statement if we did.
Thank you for that. So speaking of all of you members, so in looking at the bylaws, I think I mentioned this last time, our bylaws say 12 to 15 members, even with Ed leaving, just from a numbers perspective, because we're talking about monitoring. So I start with the numbers. We have 12. There are 3 positions that are required to be on the ETAC. Those are Sustainability Commission, Planning Commission, and City Council. Those are the 3 specific positions. All the rest of them are at large. However, the bylaws do talk about wanting a diversity of interests and representation and that sort of thing. We right now, I mean, with the holidays and everything, there was no way that we were going to be able to do a recruitment. And frankly, it would be pretty difficult for us to do a recruitment right now. I'm going to be out for the next 2 weeks. Elena is covering me on all of this. And then we're trying to go to Planning Commission and City Council. So I guess what I would say at this point is that given where we're at with the numbers being okay, and that we are wrapping up the report. And Ed is welcome to provide comments at the beginning. I mean, he knows how this works. He's well engaged, and he also knows that he has the ability to stay on, or had the ability to stay on. But that was not something that he pursued. So I'm happy to let him know that that came up again about whether or not he would have an interest in staying on. That, you know, I'm happy to tell him that, but he did know that. We did talk about that. So I think that's where we're at. I mean, we're at the end of the report, and we're going to be starting up a new cycle of monitoring. I want to give you guys a break. And so that actually might work out with recruitment and getting a new person on board. I fully agree with you, Sue. Ed and I had long conversation when he said he was retiring. I was like, no. I really wanted to get the report out before, especially before we had any of the original TRG members leave the committee, but that didn't happen. But I am grateful that he was able to be here for about 99% of it. So that's good. But that's kind of the status of where we're at right now.
Okay.
Heather, do you think I mean, we could all call Ed and say, Ed, get your butt back here, and maybe that would do it. But on the other hand, I also think that some sort of appreciation could be sent to him. I mean, if you could talk, I think it should come from the mayor and the city manager. I mean, because he's been in it, Sue, how long? Probably close to 15, 16 years. He's been along on this process. And I think that does call for some sort of recognition, not by just staff or this committee. I think it should go higher up. So if you can try and raise that up the flagpole, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Bill, do you have thoughts? Go ahead.
No, just a question. In the recording from last meeting, Ed mentioned the name of the person that was taking his position. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, if Ed's just kind of like done, had enough, and might that his replacement be considered as joining this committee just from their role. But I couldn't recall if I knew the person that was taking his job.
Yeah, so the Home Builders Association of Lane County has hired Betsy Schultz as the government liaison. And my understanding is that she has interest in the Home Builders Association has interest in her participating on the EETAC. We do a formal recruitment, and typically it's done with the other boards and commissions, which is done before the beginning of the fiscal year. So we would try to get somebody on by no later than July. So that's why, yeah, that's what I know. And that's usual, our normal process.
Is this a council appointed or a city manager?
It's a city
appointed?
manager appointed.
Yeah.
Yep. But it
Okay.
requires notice and all that stuff. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's super helpful. That's good info. I think, John, I like your idea. Maybe that's something that, that Heather, if you guys are willing to bring up, if you want, I'm happy to do the outreach and ask, Mayor Venice if she or Sarah would be willing to reach out to Ed and just reflect our discussion about it and the value that we see in having him stay on, because I know that it would say a lot coming from them. So if you want to follow up with me and the group would be supportive of that, I'm happy to make that ask. I actually have a meeting with Mayor Venice next week. So anyway, okay, I think we're good. We're done for the evening. I know we're now a couple minutes late, so we were all ahead and now we're a few minutes behind, but if there's nothing else, then I can go ahead and let you all go for the evening and adjourn our meeting. Okay. All right. We'll see you all on the 3rd. Sounds like that's our next one. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Heather, have a
Thank
great
you.
restorative vacation or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Have a good
see.
time.
Don't
If
break.
Omicron gets us, maybe we won't, but we're gonna try.
Omicron is dropping in South Africa. So.
I heard that. Yeah.
Postcard, Dennis.
Oh, right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank
Meeting
you.
adjourned. Sorry, did I
Gratitude.
not? Okay, meeting adjourned.